Hey everyone, unfortunately no presentation, no slides today. I thought it would be kind of awkward to make slides going over such brief changes for some of these bosses. So yeah, today's video is going to be about, did boss health, effective boss health, change between the final shape and the Edge of Fate? Good question. Even if you're not interested in that specific question though, if you're new to raiding and you don't know like the special modifiers that affect different bosses in raids and dungeons, this is a good video because I will be going over all of those things as well once again. And then of course, if you're a returning member and you already know this stuff, then it's just confirmation of whether it still exists from the final shape in case any of these modifiers are removed. I know there was a rumor that was spread, for example, that Kali and Shirochi no longer take 2 times impact related damage to the head. That is not true. And we're going to be going over stuff like that. Maybe doing a little myth busting in this video as well. So real quick, before we get started, I would like to talk about methodology because I think not everybody knows exactly how we measure boss health in Destiny 2. So there's a couple ways you can measure boss health. You can either kill a boss or like wipe when the boss is like really low and just see what the wipe screen says. Now wipe screens, some of them are unreliable right now. They are reporting again 50% less damage than they should be. So that is going to be a bit off for some bosses for sure. And the other thing is, of course, there's rounding error and, of course, some weapons or high damage strategies where everybody's shooting at the same time. You might just not see certain damage numbers reported on the wipe screen. And so these can be a little bit inaccurate. And so because of that, we developed this methodology where you actually shoot a boss with one person only. You shoot a boss with a damage source that you know is not going to affect the health bar differently compared to how much it does visually on the screen, right? So examples of this would be like Whisper, Xeno, stuff that's high damage per shot, right? High damage per shot. These days I use Parasite a lot as well, as you'll see in the footage that I'll throw up on screen on top of this video as background footage. Why you want to do high damage per shot is you can shoot the boss and then you can see exactly how much the health bar moves, and then you can shoot the boss again, see how much the health bar moves, and the higher damage you have per shot, the bigger chunks you'll be taking out of the health bar, which means it'll be more accurate. If you're only moving the health bar a tiny bit at a time, let's say you're shooting like an auto rifle or something, the boss's health bar might not even move a single pixel. And so you want to be as accurate as possible. You want to take some nice big chunks out of the health bar so you have a nice solid approximation to go off of. So what do I mean by approximation? Well, let me go ahead and go to this Last Wish Kali slide over here. I shoot Parasite at Kali 7 times, and I know exactly how much damage Parasite does based on the numbers I'm seeing on my screen. And for every damage amount, I plot that against the amount of damage that I've dealt to her health bar. So using Destiny Damage Tracker, which if you're not familiar, it's basically a tool, which I'll show on screen right now, that you can use to measure the amount of pixels that have been depleted from the boss's health bar. It just reads the boss health bar at the bottom of the screen by basically watching your display for orange and non-orange pixels. Now, if we go ahead and look at Parasite here, you'll see 10,462 damage to Kali deals approximately 4% of her health. And then an additional 2815 plus 1025 does an additional maybe 1 or 1.3% to her health. And you keep doing this over and over and over, and eventually you have a plot that looks something like this. You have percentage dealt to the health bar on the x-axis, and then you have damage done visually on the y-axis. And then these will form a line. These will form a line. It won't be a perfect line, which is why you get multiple points, and you want these points to be kind of spread out so they're not within the same pixel. Otherwise, you're going to look something like a step function like this. You don't want that, right? So you want a bunch of points, and then you find a line of best fit using a linear approximation. And so when you do this, and then you plug in 100, so what would this graph look like if you followed this model, and then you did 100% of the boss's health, you plug in 100 for X here, and you get a calculated value, which is, you see here, 3008 times 100 minus 1360 equals 299,440. Now, there is still going to be some error. And the way that you can kind of see this error is you can approximate it. It really depends on how many pixels you have and stuff like that. That's a little difficult and a bit tedious to do for every single boss in the game. Remember, there's like 45 plus tests that we did here, right? Me and my team, shout out to my team, of course, everybody that stuck along with me during this process. We literally visited over the course of 6.5, 7 hours, every single raid and dungeon boss in the game. And that was fast, by the way. In previous seasons, we definitely took maybe multiple sessions. Fortunately, this time we were able to knock out literally every raid and dungeon boss in the same day on one session, right? In one session. So pretty impressive stuff. Shout out to my team for being consistent with clearing these encounters and just helping me get to these bosses. We literally did every single raid and dungeon encounter. That out of the way, let's talk about error. So how do you identify error? So some of these bosses I actually tested on 3 different modes. You can see here, +0 health, -10 health, and -30 health. this would correspond to back when raids were -10 when the Edge of Fate first launched versus +0, which is what they are now. And then -30 just corresponds to Master. So if you expect the health values from all three of these modes, the true health values, to be the exact same, then the number that you get here should be pretty similar. And you can see here, the number, the error is maybe a couple thousand. It's a couple thousand. Obviously, with larger health bars, with larger health pools, it's going to be greater. But even as low as, I want to say low in quotation marks, but low as Templar's health bar is, it's like 182,000, 186,000. So like I say here, these numbers, they look very precise, very specific. And people are often, they often quote my numbers and say, Shirochi has exactly 258,499 health. Well, it's very unlikely that Shirochi has exactly 258,000 or 253,511 health, but it's more likely that she is somewhere around there. I would say plus minus a couple thousand. Again, it's going to be greater with higher health pools for obvious reasons. Each pixel represents more health on those bosses. But as I say here, these HP values are pretty accurate. They're good enough for like approximating and calculating kills, but don't be fooled by the specificity of the numbers you see. Linear approximations inherently have some error. Depending on, how the boss health removes, if DDT is reporting pixels correctly, and of course, interpixel, subpixel error as well. So it's a line of best fit. It's not a perfect model. There's other ways to measure health using like knucklehead radar and stuff for seeing exactly how much the damage that you do increases and doing like an approximation based off of that. But this is a tried and true method. It's really simple to implement, and it doesn't require me to have people get a boss down really low HP. And from calculations that we've done in terms of like damage strategies and literally using these health values and health values in my damage spreadsheet for calculating kills and stuff like that, these have been pretty accurate. Okay, so with that little preamble, let's actually talk about boss health. Last Wish, let's talk about that first. Kali, Shirochi, Morgith, Riven. Kali and Shirochi, the Techian model, they take 2 times damage to the head. They have a separate hitbox that is their head hitbox, and then they have a body hitbox, so neck and lower. And if you shoot the head, funnily enough, with something like a grenade launcher, the impact component of the grenade launcher, the non-explosive part, will actually do 2 times damage to her head. So she has like 2 separate hitboxes. There's a bunch of weapons that you might not think would do 2 times damage to her head. I believe even like fusion rifles are impact damage. So if you spray a fusion from like her neck up to the top of her head, you'll see that the number doubles when it reaches her head. So regardless of what you're shooting, try to aim for her head and try to use high impact weapons at her head, which is going to be, precision stuff. Because a lot of the time, when the thing that's unique about Kali and Shuro is that when bosses are good for impact damage sources, normally those bosses don't have crits. Kali and Shirochi are 2 of the only bosses where you have a crit on something that does increased impact damage. So basically use Izzy, use slugs, etc., etc. You know the drill. And then I will say percent change wise here, now that we know what our margin of error tends to be, I would say anything that's below 5%, 4%-ish is probably just a difference in measurement. A difference in measurement, difference in, measurement error. Some stuff though here, for example, Atheon, -7, 8%. That's where it gets maybe a little bit where it's like, maybe something was changed. We're not really sure. But I will say, Final Shape to Edge of Fate is much less egregious than previous measurements that we've done. For example, I believe when the Final Shape first came out, bosses like Crota and, Explicator and certain dungeon bosses saw massive swings in their effective HP that were much bigger than any of the values you see here. I mean, the vast majority of these numbers are single digit. And you're seeing maybe Ranix, which is an intentional change, -14%. You have Atheon, -8%, 7%. And then really nothing else is to that level. I mean, you have Rolk at 8%. So not a lot of big changes here. So most of these we can kind of chalk up to margin of error. Let's talk about some of this other stuff though. Okay. So I wrote effective health here. So you might be wondering, what does effective health mean? Effective health, this column is supposed to represent how much damage you do to the boss if you're damaging it the way it was intended to be damaged. So Kali and Shirochi, obviously they have a 2x head impact modifier, hitbox, whatever you want to call it. And this basically means you should be using crit weapons. And if you do use crit weapons, their effective health is technically half. It's half because you do 2 times the damage to their head that you would do to a standard boss's head. So the effective health here is going to be 150k, 126k, but the real health, if you actually look at the wipe screen and stuff like that, is going to be around 300k, 253k. Okay? Morgith and Riven, to my knowledge at least, still have intrinsic damage resistance that they had baked into them when they first released. So for those who don't know, Morgith and Riven have 40% damage resist against Sleeper, 45% damage resist against snipers, and 55% damage resist against shotguns. So if you are to use weapons on Morgith and Riven, even though they're not particularly hard to kill or anything for like a solo or maybe like a duo or something like that, just keep this in mind. Just keep this in mind anytime you want to do some sort of shotgun damage with like Perfect Paradox or something like that on Tractor. Just have that thought in your mind that these weapons do reduce damage to these bosses, as far as I know, right? As far as I know, we tested this last patch. We didn't test it this patch, but I would assume that things are the same. I tested with Parasite on these bosses to keep things consistent. But yeah, Morgith and Riven do have that special damage resist. But besides that, they don't really have anything special about them. Morgith, pretty standard boss. You know, he just has a big crits on his back. And then Riven, a little special, I suppose I will mention, is that shooting her mouth and shooting her kind of facial hitbox, I will say, does 2 times the damage visually compared to her arm or her body. But her effective health when you shoot her in the mouth is higher. So the effective damage is the same between her body and her head, and her mouth hitbox thingy, that doesn't do 2 times damage to her. It doesn't do 2 times damage to her. Unlike, for example, Callie or Shuro, it's just a visual thing. It's just a visual thing. You will still do effective crit damage to her, but just remember it's a visual thing. So if people are doing sword damage on the body and you see them doing less damage than you and you are shooting a linear at her mouth, that's the reason why. That's the reason why. Okay, next up we have Garden of Salvation. Pretty standard stuff here. Very, very like identical health, I would say. And then Consecrated Sanctified, 153k, 196k. I mean, pretty standard stuff. And then, you know, in terms of like health scaling up, probably some of you have seen that Twitter graph that I posted. Yeah, this is pretty standard stuff. You know, 150k, 200k boss health in raids. You're going to see this start to skyrocket as we move chronologically forward through encounters and raid releases. Next up, we have DSC. So this percent change thing, DSC is incredibly awkward to measure. I'm going to throw some footage up on screen here like I have been doing for the other bosses. But you can see that DSC, for like the first half of a Fuse's health bar, you literally do not move the health bar. You don't move the health bar. It's not even lag. It just doesn't move. So using health bar measurements for this boss is quite challenging. And I used, I believe, Grand Overture this time on the boss because it does higher damage per shot. It's an impact weapon and it doesn't have any like weird splash double numbers or stuff like that. So I used Grand Overture on this boss and I did some calculations with it. Just ignore the percent change thing though, because the health bar is super unreliable for this boss. But basically what I want to tell you is this boss probably has 2000 health per fuse when you're shooting it with something. And the boss, each fuse, still dies to 1 choir mag per fuse. So, you know, that's all you really need to know about this boss. This boss is very much like a what weapon are you using and how many shots does it take type of boss versus exactly how much health does this boss have. So ignore these kind of numbers here. Also, I believe I multiplied this by a certain scalar here because this boss also is a bit weird. It has like, it uses base damage numbers instead of using like the boss scalar, I believe. So it's just a bit of a weird boss because it's a proxy boss. But just know that it's 1 choir mag per fuse. Like that's all you really need to know with this boss. Okay, next up we have Atrax. Atrax is a bit weird, like Zoetic Lockset, doesn't take proper crit damage to the health bar. So you might see a crit damage number when you shoot her in the chest, but the actual damage to the health bar will be as if you shot a body shot. So don't use crit weapons on this boss for the most part. Just focus on using supers, stuff like Parasite. People have also tested Whirling Ovation on this boss, kind of weird. This boss also seems to take 10 to 15% additional health bar damage once you break her clone and she kind of explodes and you get those yellow numbers, even though they're not crits. She takes like, you know, I think it's like 15% more damage during this period. So, I mean, if you want to do damage to her and you have a higher damage source and a lower damage source, maybe stick to using that lower damage source second instead of first. Maybe just some food for thought there, because once she breaks on that impact of, you know, first crossing her threshold, she does take a little bit more damage. But yeah, 76k health makes sense. Her phase is one of the shortest in the game. Tanix, stock standard boss, 277k, 278k, just completely standard boss. Nothing really to talk about here. Templar, this was a boss that I used to confirm the master health of bosses. So we did Master Templar, Master Rolk, Master Golgoroth, Master Oryx, Master Nezarec, and then we did a bunch of Master Dungeons as well. Sorry, we did 2 Master Dungeons as well, Master Phrygia and Master Wrathel. And we made sure these were bosses that were spread out across different activities. And I can confirm now, right, because this didn't used to be the case. When Master Raids first came out, Master Vogue and Master Vow, the health bars or the health values for these bosses were definitely different from normal. They were definitely higher. This is no longer the case. This is no longer the case. master raids and master dungeons have the exact same health as their normal counterparts. Okay, as you can see here, 397, 394, 409, 408, 423, 419. You can see they have the exact same health, and Templar helped us confirm that. So Templar, 182k, pretty straightforward. Atheon, I'll show a clip on screen. I believe Atheon is taking 5 times bugged damage right now. Now, I know basically no one is doing VOG right now, but for those of you not in the know, I believe Atheon is taking 5 times damage right now. It may be 5 times ability damage only, because the 2 things that I tested were grapple on the day that this was kind of found. And then recently I also placed my own well and shot Parasite. And placing your well and shooting Parasite and stuff like that, being in your own well still counts as super damage for some instances. Like, it doesn't work with courage conversion anymore. It doesn't work with the super stat, but it does count for super damage for some specific instances. And this might be one of those instances. So maybe he's only taking 5 times ability damage right now. However, with the 2 sources I tested, he is in fact taking 5 times damage, exactly 5 times damage, which stacks with times vengeance's 3 times damage multiplier. So that's why you're seeing the 15 times damage number that I posted about grapple melee on Atheon. And so his effective health right now is 50k, right? I'm going to change this if they ever fix Atheon, but his effective health right now is 50k. I almost one-phased him solo. Like, literally, I was just shooting Parasite. If I didn't miss and I didn't like try to survive because I was getting really low, I would have just one-phased him solo with Parasite and no debuff and stuff like that. So pretty funny stuff. Next up, we have Caretaker. Caretaker is an interesting boss. I did some investigation on this boss recently, so let's have a little chat about that. So first of all, you might see this health value, right? This is the, by the way, this white highlighted value, or I suppose if you're not on dark mode, it'll be black, but this white highlighted value here is the actual health of the boss in game, like numerically on the wipe screen. And Caretaker has 664,000 health, which sounds like a lot. However, there's something you should know about Caretaker. So Caretaker, when you're sitting on a plate, you have this buff called Resonant Breakthrough, and that makes all of your damage do 2 times damage to Caretaker. This boss, I don't know why they made it like this, but technically has half of this effective health, so more like 332k, right? So 0.5 EHP, so effective health, due to the plate buff. And also something interesting about Caretaker that I've always wondered, and that I think nobody's really had the tools to really test effectively, is Caretaker, you do 25% more damage to him when you pass the threshold visually. When you shoot him with a weapon, let's say you're doing 1,000 damage. Once you pass his threshold for those 5 seconds before he kind of swims up to wherever he goes next, you're going to do 1,250 damage. Now the question is this real damage or is it fake damage? Is it a real buff or is it a fake buff? And I answered that question this time around. So let's go ahead and look at Caretaker. And the way you know this is quite simple. So if you look at Caretaker's health approximation, you see that for every pixel of health that we deplete from the boss, we need to do 6,721 damage, right? So think about this as like the M value in an MX plus B, like Y equals MX plus B, like slope, right? So think about this as a slope, 6,721 damage per % of his health, per 1% of his health. Now, once you pass the threshold, what does that look like? So I took a DDT recording of purely post-threshold damage. I asked some friends to get him really low next to his threshold. And then I used Xeno. I used Xeno to break past the threshold and purely post-threshold damage, where I was visually doing 25% more. For some reason, DDT now thinks, or this approximation now thinks, Caretaker needs 8,598 damage per % of his health bar, per 1% of his health bar, which means Caretaker actually effectively has around 27% more health when you pass his threshold, which means that even though you're visually doing 25% more damage, and maybe you are really doing 25% more damage, he gains 27%, I suppose you should say, damage resistance to you when you pass the threshold. So in reality, the net is you're doing slightly less damage, but let's just say this could be measurement error, right? So let's say 25%, his whole health bar is the same. Once you pass threshold, even though visually it looks like you're doing more damage, you're actually doing the exact same effective damage to his health bar. So that makes things really simple for me. I don't need to explain anything. I mean, it's a quirk if you want to know about the quirk and you want to understand why you're doing more damage after you pass the threshold, but the actual damage that you do, his entire health bar, you can basically treat it the same. Also, another thing that I want to talk about is I've had some of these bosses where I've killed them completely, or I've gotten them down to 50% or 40% health. I can really personally confirm now at this point, unless certain bosses are very different from others, there is no health bar like inflation. There's no like front loading or back loading on health bars. It is the same the whole way down. It is the same the whole way down. Anytime you feel like you did more in the first phase, or like it's easier on the second phase on day one or something like that, unless Bungie is literally going in, which I highly doubt, unless they're going in and custom tuning bosses on contests to have front loaded and back loaded health bars, all bosses in this game have the exact same health scaling all the way through their health bar. Otherwise, some of these lines would be curved or they would look different at certain points. They all have the exact, every pixel of the boss's health bar represents the same amount of health. So moving on, Rulk, including Final Stand. I mean, there's nothing special here. I mean, maybe he has a bit more health, but this could be measurement error too. Like, I'm not really sure. It's not really big enough to comment on. But yeah, 394k effective, 397k effective, whatever number you want to go with here. War Priest, this guy used to be the king in terms of, you know, highest health crown in the game, 480k effective. And you'll see that eventually that was overtaken by Witness when we get there. Golgoroth, 409k effective. I believe I have a number for Unstable Light as well. Let me actually provide that to you real quick. Let me go here. Golgoroth +0. You'll see Unstable. Yeah, Unstable Light does 13.5k damage to this boss. For those of you that are wondering, I probably should have put that in the notes. 13.5k. And then I believe on Master, does it do a different number? Yeah, there you go. 11.858. Okay. So for those of you that want to know exactly how much Unstable does, that's how much it does. Pretty significant chunk of the boss's health. But yeah, there you go. 408k, 409k effective. Daughters. Okay. I'll throw a picture of this up on the screen. When you don't have a bottom screen health bar to check boss health, measuring boss health with like an on-screen health bar, for example, Daughters or Vorgith, is extremely painful. You need to literally take screenshots every time you shoot, like every time you do a shot on the boss, and then you need to put these screenshots into Photoshop and measure them by hand. You need to measure them by hand. And so if we go to the Daughters tab here, by the way, this is a crazy amount of testing. Like, this is the most tabs I have in like any of my spreadsheets, from final shape to +0 to -30 and stuff like that. But yeah, let's go ahead and look at Daughters, and you'll see here, instead of health versus delt, I have pixels, because I went in Photoshop and I counted the pixels for every single whisper shot that I did in the video recording. And then I did some approximation. Her whole health bar is like 455 pixels long. And then we boom, 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 boom. We have this nice, beautiful line here, and we get an approximation of her health, right? Now, this is not going to be as accurate as DDT, as pixel measurement with a health bar that's much longer, but still, with the raw amount of data points that I have, this is, I would say, pretty accurate. So definitely very annoying though. I would not recommend this. This took me like a long time on stream. There's a VOD of me just counting Daughters health bar pixels in Photoshop. I mean, I'll throw it up on the screen. You can take a look at it, but it's painful stuff. So yeah, about 168k, 167k per Daughter. You have Oryx. Oryx is a little weird because like his health bar, like at the front of it, if you ever go to Oryx in the future in like an LFG or something, look at the front of his health bar. There's like a weird like gap in his health bar for some reason. So that makes DDT thrown off a little bit. But besides that, yeah, like 423k, a lot of health, but not as much as War Priest. War Priest has got more. Explicator, 295k. Nezarec, 262k. I mean, pretty low by final boss standards, but there it is. Irute, 288k. Crota, a little bit special. Crota, I believe he should still take 35% more damage from swords. So that's pretty interesting, I suppose. Maybe I should, lower this effective health. We could do divided by 1.35 or something, right? And there you go, 355, 356k effective health. Some people don't use swords on Crota though, so I kind of left it as 480k. Maybe I'll change that in the future, I don't know. Or grapple melee and stuff like that. Obviously, that doesn't do more damage to Crota. Herald is pretty normal, 391k. Witness was our new king of total damage. War Priest used to be the king at 481k-ish. Now you have Witness at 543k. And now, this is where things get dicey, get a little dicey. So Desert Perpetual, first of all, it's -10. So -10, I believe you're doing approximately 25%, like 24.66 or something, 25% less damage effectively to these bosses. So if I want to equalize them and equate their experience to the experience of damaging other bosses on this list, then I also have to multiply their health bars by 2232 over 1630, which is that multiplier I was talking about, right? So about 25% more. And look at the effective health of these bosses. I mean, even their actual health is, some of them are higher than Witness. You can look at this and just be like, that is crazy. That's a crazy amount of health, right? It's a crazy amount of effective health. Even Iatros, which is the weakest of the bunch, and he's the most annoying to damage because he's a wyvern, his crit's annoying, blah, blah, blah. Even Iatros, he is, I would say like fairly in middle of the pack, toward the front of the pack maybe, in terms of raid bosses, and he's not a final boss. And then you have Karagos. Look at this guy. Almost 1,000,000 effective health. Look at Witness. Witness is 543. 943,000 effective health. That is equivalent to almost 50 million health in the final shape. 50 million. When Witness came out, I was like, damn, that's a lot of total health. When War Priest came out, I was like, damn, this is way more than, like, you know, previous bosses. This is the biggest jump we've ever seen in, like, effective boss health. Even ignoring effective. Like, let's say Desert Perpetual is +0. 756k is still a lot. Like, that is a lot still. Okay, let's move on to dungeons. I mean, dungeons, you'll see a lot of green numbers here. Vorgith, 23k. Pretty straightforward here. Dullinkaru, 25k. I believe Dullinkaru has elite scaling still, by the way. So, like, if you want to use Wardcliff on her, it does crazy damage. Legendary Rockets with Wolf Packs will also do, like, crazy damage to her because she's an elite. But I believe her crit is, like, normal. I don't think it's, like, a Techian crit. I'm pretty sure her crit is, like, normal damage now. Zulmak, 61.7k. Phalanx Echo, 50k. Kel Echo, 110k. Makes sense. Long phase on Kel Echo. And then once you get past Grasp, you know, you really start to see the boss health bars start getting fatter and fatter. Phrygia, 101k. Avarok, 112k. Galrun, 133k. Although this, you can argue that Unstable Essence plays a factor here that increases your damage by a significant amount. Vault mini bosses, I totally forgot about these guys. I also had to count these by hand, pixel counting by hand. So I'll show you like a picture of that on screen, I suppose. 22k or so, not a lot of health. This excludes their shield though, which is elemental. And then Keitel, 120k. Keitel has like a weird crit. I will briefly talk about that for a second here. Let me just pull up the data. Keitel, she has 90% damage resist if you don't have Waking Resonance. That's something to note. And she has some weird crit values. I didn't measure her crit this patch, but in pre-Revenant scalar values, slugs were doing 21% extra damage to her crit, I believe. And snipers and linears were also doing 1.35 times damage to her crit, which is just a bit odd, I suppose. But yeah, Keitel, I mean, I guess crit weapons are like a little bit more effective on her than like normal bosses. Achilles, 112k. Perseus, 148, 149k. Ekthar, 180k, excluding the shield. I believe I have some data here from a friend of mine that was helping me during testing. They were using Arbalist and just telling me the number that they saw on their screen. So I believe the shield for Ekthar is approximately 10k, 10.5k. And I believe the shield for Simuma is around the same number. It's like 10.5k. Okay, for those of you wondering how much the shield is. And 10k is not that much health, right? It's not that much. I think they might have nerfed the shield health. Some people were saying they did. I mean, 10k is like, 1/18th of like Ekthar's health bar. That's really not that much. You could probably take that off with like a single rocket or something like that. So yeah, really not that much health. I believe the shields used to be a bit beefier. Maybe they changed it with the Rite of the Nine changes and stuff like that. So yeah, let's keep going. Wrathel, 112k. Locust, 239k. Heffend, 255k, including his final stand. And then we get to our second last weird boss, which is going to be Ranix. Ranix has 65% global damage resist, as far as I'm aware, to account for the fact that he has 6 damageable bodies. So if you take his actual health bar, he has 224k. And then what I did here is I divided his health bar by 6, because technically you can damage all 6 at the same time if you like T-Crash or Glacial Quake or something like that. And then I actually multiplied in the damage resist. And so if you have a damage source that can deal damage to all 6 targets, for example, like using a tether or something like that, then the effective health is actually only 110k. But granted, a lot of these damage sources, even with tether distribution and stuff like that, you're not going to be doing exactly 6 times scaling, right? So his effective health is definitely going to be higher, significantly higher as well, if you're not able to damage all 6 of his little clones. So don't take this number for granted. It is technically higher, but I gave you the raw value. I gave you the DR if you want to do some math with that. Puppeteer, 325k, makes sense, very long phase. I mean, this is getting into raid boss health territory. Zoetic Lockset, 205k effective health. I will say though, just remember, Zoetic Lockset surges don't work on him. He's just like, I say he, the Zoetic Lockset is just like Atrax. Crit damage is not done correctly to this boss. I don't know if they fixed that yet. I mean, it's been in their known issues for a long, long time. I wonder if they'll fix it for Atrax as well, because Atrax kind of suffers from the same problem from being a proxy boss. If you don't know what I'm talking about, if you stick Zoetic with like a damage over time source and look under the floor near the middle of the map, there's a 5th streaker that represents the entire health bar underneath the map. So yeah, it's like a proxy boss like Atrax. Atrax has a captain way out of bounds in a box way above the map, past a bunch of barriers inside of its own little cage. That is a proxy boss as well. It seems like proxy bosses just have weird damage stuff, like Fallen Shield is weird. You have Crypt Security is weird. I don't know. All of these proxy bosses always just have like weird things in terms of damage scaling. Zoetic is not an exception, right? So surges don't work properly. Certain debuffs don't work properly. Yeah, that's basically all I have to say about Zoetic. And next up we have Karev. Karev, pretty standard boss. I mean, 296k total. Nothing really special in terms of modifiers or anything like that. He's obviously a bit annoying to do damage to. But yeah, that is pretty much it, guys. That's pretty much it. For those of you that do use Destiny Damage Tracker for your own leisure and testing, I included a link in my Google Drive here to the latest version of the boss_health.txt for your settings, for your using viewing pleasure. And yeah, that's pretty much it. If you have any questions about my methodology, feel free to leave them in the comments. If you have any questions or corrections about the specific numbers here, feel free to leave that in the comments as well. You can DM me on Discord. My DMs are always open. And yeah, you can see all this data that we use. We use Parasite this time around because Parasite, I've discovered, doesn't have chunking issues and does a lot of damage per shot. And so I can have less individual like kind of data points, but they're kind of more accurate and more spread out than something like a Xeno, especially when Xeno is like a bit weird on certain bosses in terms of damage distribution and consistent numbers. So yeah, that is pretty much it. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'll be flying back to the US in 2 days now. So tomorrow I'll make one more video about, I believe, exotic weapon ranking, if I'm not mistaken, exotic weapon tier list update. And then there'll be a little break from me. And then we'll come back and we'll make some more damage related videos. So I'll see you guys then, and goodbye for now.